Hello everyone, welcome to Crafty Hand Studio Backstage. Welcome to Leaving Part 6. You'll notice there's a new monitor added above the standard 3 monitor setup that I used. The video capture device that I was using defaults to a 1080 aspect ratio, resolution rather, which is a true 16:1 aspect ratio. I was capturing in 1440 by 900, which is the size of my standard 3 monitors. So I hope that this will solve the grainy appearance of my captures. We'll see. This is the first video I've used it on. It did look good in tests, however. So let's start by opening our project. Last week we left off ready to add a synthesizer lead to the outro section, we're calling it, of the song. In working on that part, listening previous, I discovered an interesting and troubling artifact in the sound. This is actually way too large. Let's reduce the size of that. On the flute parts, there was a grating sound up here where the tempo changed. It was really horrible. You can see right here where the tempo slowed down at the end of this. Let's play it for you. The flute parts created an interesting grating artifact, and I could not for the life of me get rid of it. So I did what came to mind, which was to reduce the volume. I went to a volume automation track, not on the piano, wrong track, on the 2 flutes, and I just turned them down. You can see this slope here, and I did that on both of the flute parts. So I took down the annoying issue and I added a little percussion part here, just some nice chimey hits, also taken from the Prague Symphony Orchestra samples that Miroslav has provided. Beautiful samples. Here's that plug-in. It's from the Orchestral Percussion Studio sound set, and they're really nice. So as the piano continues at its normal volume and the 2 flute parts fade away, I add what may be considered a distraction, but I believe it's quite musical as well. So I'll just play a few bars and you can hear that solution to my audio issue. I think that filled it out nicely. I'm going to play it one more time with a little more monitor level in the studio here, just to verify that the tracks are working properly. Okay, that seems to be fine. All right, so let's mute those flute tracks again and get back to where we left off. Here we go. The center section, the outro section of the song, this is where we left off last week. had a brass and string bed. The percussion track was just cymbals playing, which I kind of like to keep the rhythm. And I was ready to put a synthesizer lead on top. Now, in the comments, my friend Renee asked if I was willing to experiment with new sounds on the synthesizer, and I totally am. I usually go through many sounds trying to find the right one. I was hearing a sort of fluty, hollow lead sound, and I actually spent a whole day auditioning sounds, trying to make something fit there. But in the end, I went back to a sort of derivative of the big synth lead sound from the center section. I used a different plugin for it. I used a synthesizer called Mystic Synth. And I'll show you that plugin. And it's basically a waveform generator with oscillators. I experimented and came up with a leaving synth outro. I called it a sound. And here, I'll play a little bit of that for you just so you can hear the sound of the synth. Now it's a sawtooth, basic sawtooth on 2 different oscillators, and I programmed some strange crackling and distortion into the attack after the aftertouch on the keyboard, so that the sound sort of morphs as it goes on. So here I will play the synthesizer lead on the bed as we left it last week. Maybe. As soon as I can figure it out. I want to make sure that I just play the bed that we had last week, because as you'll soon discover, as I worked on this, I decided to add several more parts to it. That's often the case when I'm working on a song. I'll hear more parts, and it gets more and more interesting as it goes by. So here we are now, the bed from last week with the synth. Caught the loop there. Now I really liked that sound, but it wasn't quite fat enough for me, so I decided to double that part. I just copied the exact same MIDI onto another track, and I used a Moog. This plugin is Atmosphere, the Dream Synth module, and it's called Mogi Lead. Changed the waveforms just slightly to get the sounds that I liked. So here it is doubled with a slight pan right and left. This is something we would do more in the mix, but I did work a little bit with the pans at the source of the instrument. Here we go again with both synthesizers playing the lead. Now the next thing I decided to add was more bottom. Since we don't have a bass part playing there and the strings I used were in upper octaves, I decided to go in and add some more Prague Symphony bass section. This is actually the full orchestra, but it sounds very heavy. There's a lot of really nice double B flat basses playing here in the section. And this fills out the low end. So we'll unmute the low strings track and play a bit of it with the bottom end. I think that nicely filled out the bottom, and it's nothing distracting. It's just giving it some support. Now I was also hearing some more motion in the middle. I found this sound in Atmosphere. While that's open, called Pluctavo, which is sort of a plucked sound. Like this. Harpy plucked sound. So I added a MIDI section, just an ostinato picked part through the background to give it more interest and more emotion. Now my idea for that is to have that part fading in and panning in the background as things go on. So we'll do that in the mix. We'll automate some moves on the faders and the pan to keep it coming and going, adding interest and depth and motion to the background of the song. Now I think that's all the parts we need. The song will end with just the flute and piano. I had the same problem with the ritardando here, creating an artifact in the sound of the flute, even when it was just one flute. And I solved it this time by just changing the patch from that expressive flute to a bottle flute. I kind of like the difference there. It's a really hollow, empty ending, which is what I was going for. After that big majestic build-up, now we end with a simple piano and flute. Here's the end. So we have all the components to our song now, all the tracks. Of course, as we get into the mix, other things will occur to me, and we'll add those as it happens. But the first stage of preparing for the mix is just doing a lot of homework. This is busy work. Each one of these MIDI tracks, I'm now going to bounce to audio. I like to work with audio as opposed to MIDI for several reasons. It's more old school. I understand how to edit the audio a lot better than I do the MIDI. I can look at waveforms, cut, splice, slice and dice. And I can do that a lot more intuitively with audio waveforms than I can with MIDI, these little dots, as opposed to waveforms. And also, it creates less stress on the CPU of the computer. It's actually having to compute through plugins all of these different MIDI tracks simultaneously. Once I've converted them to audio files, it's much less stressful for the computer. I'll mute all of the MIDI tracks, tuck them away into a folder called MIDI files here, and then we'll just be working with audio. So the process is selecting the audio you want to export or bounce from MIDI to audio. So we'll grab the whole song. So I could have done that a lot faster if I changed the view resolution. I like to go a little past and a little bit forward to make sure there's enough. Let's go ahead and zoom to the full view of the project. There's everything. I'll take this off and we'll be able to grab just a little bit more to make sure I don't miss an entrance, some note that perhaps did not get quantized that hit a fraction early. That way we won't lose it. And then we, first of all, unmute and unsolo everything. Then we will start at the top and work our way down bouncing these tracks. So we'll solo the piano track. We'll play a little, just make sure that's the only thing we hear, because it's all we want to bounce is a solo audio piano track. It's good there. I'm quite sure there's nothing else. Drag down and just check to make sure that everything's muted. Yes, everything looks fine. Now we go File, Export, Audio Mixdown. There's the Mixdown window. I'm going to choose Wave File. Find a place to put it. And I'm going to choose the Leaving New Work project. Interesting. That's the file name. Don't want to call it that. We're going to call this Leaving Piano. Save that. And it's going to the folder Leaving Project. We want a wave file. I'm going to go ahead and render it to 44.1 now. It'll help with the dithering process later. I'm going to import it back into the project as an audio track. And then we say export. It'll go through the step of doing this. It's going to take about 45 seconds for this particular track. And what we'll have to do is export these for every single MIDI track we've created. Then go through, mute all of the MIDI tracks and tuck them away in that MIDI file, and then we'll have a full set of audio files ready to start working on our mix. This will be tedious and time consuming, so I think I'll leave it there for today. I know I thought we would get it done in first 4 episodes, then it went to 6, but now I'm thinking I'll have all this ready in audio form for a 7th part dedicated to the mix. And just thinking about doing a mix, I see we could easily spend hours talking about the ways and techniques, tips to do mixing. So it will be condensed as it is into one episode, number 7. Now it's finished. Let's go down to the bottom here. We'll be able to see it. There is our new piano track as audio. We'll mute the piano and drag it up here into the MIDI files. Close this folder. Boom. You see the piano MIDI track has disappeared into the MIDI files folder now. Here's our audio file. That's what it looks like. waveforms. Yes. And play. And there we go. I'll be doing that to every track, creating a series of audio files for all the MIDI tracks we've created so far. And then we'll be ready to pull our mixer onto the screen and start mixing the project. Here's all our tracks. We ended up with 19 tracks. Actually, I guess it'll be 17 different tracks of instruments. And then we have an effects track, one effects track created so far, and then of course the one bounced audio file. So that's it for part 6. Please come back next week, and we really should finish this song next week. Thank you for watching. Remember, listen to music. It will make you better.